I'm your host, Carolyn Solo, LCSW, EMDR therapist, and mom of 3 daughters. Thank you for joining me.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 90 of the Future Template Parent Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Carolyn Solo, LCSW and PhD, EMDR consultant, and mom of 3 daughters. I am very excited today to be joined by Danik Bernier, who is a registered social worker in Ontario. She is also a EMDR consultant in training and a business coach for private practice therapists. And she is someone that I have connected with over Instagram. And that has been one of the wonderful things about Instagram is meeting so many other awesome therapists doing cool things. So now I'm going to let you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit more about you, and welcome.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. Yes, you're right. It's one of the beautiful things about Instagram, about social media. When it does work right and in your favor, you end up finding your people. So that's been a true gift.
Totally. Agreed.
So yeah, I'm from Canada. I'm up here in Ontario. I've been trained in EMDR since beginning of 2021. And then I was like, okay, this is a game changer for me. My clients, I'm never going back. Like, I am an EMDR therapist. It has become my whole personality.
I identify with that.
It's become my entire personality, and this is what I'm going for. And if I zoom out of like the current state of things and I look back on how things were back then, we were still in pandemic times. I was, wanting to start off my private practice on the side, was still employed full-time at my hospital job. And I was like, okay, I need to find something else here. I need to not be in this environment anymore, although they were great. But I mean, hospitals in pandemic times.
I was going to say that must have been so stressful. Was it a medical hospital, a psychiatric hospital?
A hospital for children. So like all of the above.
Oh, yeah. So hard too.
Yeah. And you know what? I was pregnant and I didn't really know because too early to pee on a stick or whatever. And I was the one in front of the hospital without proper PPE at that point because we didn't know about like what sort of PPE we needed or whatnot. I was taking folks' temperature on their foreheads. Being like, yeah, okay, you're good to go. Thank you. Wild times.
Gosh. When you think back on that, oh my gosh.
Wild times.
Really
so yeah, I was like, you know what? The government is telling me that my social worker job isn't really essential because they're bringing me to all these sorts of redeployment roles. So I got the message and I was like, okay, thank you. Thank you. So
goodbye.
Decided to pivot. And yeah, EMDR was a thing. And then I was like, okay, I'm hearing about these intensives. I'm hearing about like the option of keeping hourly clients, but also doing intensives. And then at first, as it was the case for me, but I'm sure it's the case for many people out there. The imposter syndrome was really, really big. I was like, who am I as a newly trained EMDR therapist going out there and selling intensives? And I was seeing stuff people were doing. And I was like, but I don't know much. I don't know enough, right? All these kinds of things. But then what kept screaming at me was the fact that this was a needed service in my community, in my niche. And my niche at that point was postpartum moms with birth trauma. And I was like, yeah, but it's needed. So I wrestled with that a lot. So I'm sure that you hear about that often in your line of work, the wrestling between the imposter syndrome and seeing that there's a need in the community.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, and even doing a couple of longer sessions and seeing how well it works, and still that not being enough to kind of quell the imposter syndrome,
Yeah, that's a rough one. So yeah, I was like, okay, I'm gonna go and try that out. So after many, I don't want to say failed attempts, but many attempts at finding my niche and who I really want to work with. Because at first I was like, okay, I'm just going to work with anybody, kids, teens, adults. You got trauma, I got EMDR training. Let's go. I was like, okay, no, I really want to work with, this former version of myself.
Right. Yeah.
So that's how I decided there on the niche. And then I was like, okay, but it's really working well when I do longer sessions, even if it's just a 90-minute session, right? Not necessarily like a full day or even 2 hours, but the 90-minute session. And I mean, it shouldn't be that big of a deal, because in the literal EMDR book,
Right.
Francine Shapiro says, hi, 90-minute sessions seems
Exactly.
to be working best here.
Right.
Right. But yeah, I was kind of blown away by that, because after the check-in, you have time to really get into it, and what I call like the zone of genius
Oh, totally.
on the client side, that is, where they're really into the moment and really into their subconscious mind. So I saw that and I was like, okay, I need to get on this. And also, I'm a mom of two. My first child is neurodivergent as well. And I was like, okay, but I get called to go and pick him up whenever.
You're singing my song.
Right, exactly. I get called, and at that point, he was still in daycare. He wasn't in school yet. And, you know, there was just these constant messages, constant things about, oh, well, you know, this thing happened today, this thing happened today, and just not enough bandwidth to sustain all of the information, all of the open tabs in my brain. I could not keep up at that point in my life with another client's story.
Yeah.
Just could not. It's okay that we go through our notes before the session and we kind of, you know, remind ourselves of what the story is here. But let's face it, sometimes we arrive last minute in the office, or sometimes we open up our laptop last minute and we're scratching our heads going, okay, where were we exactly?
Yep.
That's it. So I was like, okay, intensives is the way to go for me. So then I was like, okay, but who's going to pay this? And at that point, I was charging $230 per session, hourly session. I was like, okay, I need to charge a little bit more for this. So let's play around with like 20% more. So I played around with that, and I quickly saw that in my community, I was known as an hourly therapist, and there was this need for the education piece that still had to be done. Because I think one of the gifts, if you can say, that the pandemic did for therapists is that it educated people on the need for therapy.
Absolutely.
It did that for us. I mean, it did a lot. There was lots of consequences there too. But the one gift that we got as therapists is it provided the education.
I agree. And normalized telehealth. That's the other huge one.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's one thing. But I was like, okay, but now there's like this other lift that I need to do in regards of the education. So that's when we actually crossed paths, because I was working with the same editor / coach for podcasters.
Right.
Because I launched my podcast for my therapy clients. And I was like, okay, this is how I'm going to educate. And this is going to be my anchor, you know, the platform that will educate and convert people. And it did okay. But then I was like, okay, this is like one more thing. And I had
it is work. It is not, it's not rolling off, you know.
No.
Getting an episode out every week, every 2 weeks, whatever you do is a heavy lift.
Totally. So then I was like, okay, well, I didn't see that coming, because with my own ADHD, I can get overexcited about things. I was like, I didn't see that coming. So I was like, okay, but this means I either like become super Instagram famous for my message to get across, or I do the networking piece.
Right.
The networking piece is huge important, and I see your stuff and how you're really big on networking as well. And now looking back, that's the missing piece about the whole intensives journey, was the networking and taking the time to educate the professionals that would be the referral sources on what is an intensive, why it can be even better than hourly client sessions.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, I was like, okay, this is like too big of a mountain for me. But for some reason, I felt like podcasting wasn't as big of a mountain. Well, newsflash, it was. It was even a bigger mountain.
It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
So then I decided, okay, well, it's either I go all in with intensives and my business model is there,
Mm-hmm.
or I keep my hourly clients and I do offer some intensives to those clients who already know me and who already kind of bought in the EMDR magic, if you will.
Right.
Or I explore this other need of mine, which is to coach therapists in private practice on how to comfortably charge $200 plus per session in a cash pay private practice.
Gotcha.
So I was like, you know what? I'm really feeling that pull and I'm going to go explore that. So that's where I am.
Do you mind if I sort of break in and kind of
Yes.
like summarize a little bit of that?
Yes.
Because it's a really interesting journey. And a couple things I want to highlight is, first of all, recognizing that to have and I completely agree with you, to have a thriving intensives practice, networking and education of your referral sources is necessary. And that is 100%. Like you said, I'm talking about this all the time because it is uncomfortable and it is time consuming and it is really putting yourself out there. What I always tell people is it's hard, but it's not complicated,
Mm-hmm.
right? It makes total sense. How you do it makes sense. And it's not for everyone. And that's okay. If you don't want to do that, then, like you're saying, it might be that an intensives only practice or really focusing on that piece of your practice is not for you. And that's okay. You can make that decision. And in the group program I ran this fall, there were a couple of people who had never networked before. Mostly because, like in the US, they've been on insurance panels and they didn't have to. So I think for them, there was kind of a realization of like, oof, if I'm going to do this, one, I can't use insurance because insurance won't pay for intensives. And two, I'm going to have to get really uncomfortable. And I think, that turned out different ways for different people. And they made decisions based on how much did they want to do that? And that's okay. So it sounds like, and you already had a very established hourly practice.
That's it.
So it was like, that's going to serve your needs in terms of your clinical work. And that's working for you. And that makes total sense. And it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like this is something we've talked about, in other times, was that you kind of realized that you did have a cap in terms of capacity for clinical work, and there was a need for more income.
Absolutely.
And so that's where you got into adding this working with private practice therapists thing.
Absolutely.
Is that accurate?
Yes, absolutely. And so, I was faced with this decision. It's either I had three options really. It's either I take more clients / raise my fee again, which my fee is, I always raise at least once a year. So that wasn't really the problem. But the problem here was to take on more hourly clients, or I switch my business model to an intensives model, or I go this completely different route, coaching private practice therapists on setting a premium fee. And I was like, okay, but what's the lowest hanging fruit here? Where can I go? I couldn't add more clients. I was capped. My energy was capped. And there's a difference in the energy spent when it comes to the therapy work and the coaching work.
Oh, 100%. Completely. It's so different.
Yeah, it's completely different. And so there was that component, but then realizing, okay, but now the difference between the intensives and the coaching, I thought, well, you know what? I'm already established. with the hourly practice.
Mm-hmm.
This is already serving my needs. I'm already at this point, I'm already bringing in the revenue I need to sustain my life.
Mm-hmm.
I want to minimize at some point the clinical work that I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like, okay, but why stay in clinical work at this point? And this is often something I hear a lot these days around therapists needing a second revenue stream or a third revenue stream or like thousands of revenue streams, right?
Right.
And the fact of the matter is, like, if you have one revenue stream that's working really well for you and you have boundaries around your time and late cancellation fees and rescheduling and all of that, it can serve your needs really well. Even if you do get the cancellations or even if you need to cancel, it can still serve your needs really well.
Right.
So deciding on the type of business model that you want that will serve your needs is absolutely crucial, and it's okay to be transparent with yourself about that.
Mm-hmm.
And for many, intensives is definitely the way to go.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, like you said, deciding on the business model that works well for you, I think that's one, it takes a lot of, for me it did, and it sounds like for you it did too, introspection and perhaps trial and error. But once you have a sense of what that is, that, and I always tell people this, should be the guiding light. That's what should guide you, not what you think you should be doing or what other people tell you should be doing, or, you know, and right, like everyone worries will happen to them on Instagram or wherever, being told you're greedy or selfish,
Mm-hmm.
which, can happen. It's happened to me, and life goes on, but you need to figure out what is the business model you need to commit to first, instead of like letting it happen to you, because that just creates another problem where you now have a business you don't want or that doesn't work for you. So I think it is so important to be really honest with yourself, like it sounds like you were, about what actually works for you and your life. And like you said, where's the low-hanging fruit? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask about fee setting, and because you're in Canada, I think a lot of Americans, as I'm sure you know, have a lot of misconceptions about what healthcare in Canada looks like, and we think that everyone can have as much high quality therapy forever as they want. And so what is it like setting high fees for you, and what are some of the unique pieces about that, say in Canada versus the US, that you are aware of?
Yes. So I would say there's possibly even more similarities than we think. We're not so different, because here what happens is, we hear about the medical system, the healthcare system here in Canada, and how, quote unquote, we don't pay for it. Newsflash, we do with our taxes. We're in tax season right now, and let me tell you, I'm paying for it. And there's this misconception of accessibility, that because healthcare is free, that everything falls under healthcare and that it is accessible. But that's not the truth. There's only a finite number of services that fall under the healthcare system.
Okay.
And then if you are in need of something else, you are going to have to pay out of pocket, or if you have insurance through your job or you pay for private insurance, then you can be reimbursed either like in full or, a certain percentage depending on the company you're with. But it depends. So like dental care is not covered. Optometry is not covered, and psychotherapy is not covered. It's not.
Yeah.
There are these agencies and hospital settings where they do offer some psychotherapy, but the lists are almost years and years long.
If you were to have it covered by your public insurance. Okay. So there are a lot of people out there who are buying a secondary private insurance plan. Okay.
Yes, that's it. That's it. And so the here, it's not as popular as the States to get listed with an insurance company, but it's, you know, becoming more and more of a popular option.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, the reimbursements rates are fairly similar to the United States, somewhere
Okay, so
between
not good.
$60 and $80 per session or
So
something.
not good is what we're
Yeah,
saying.
yeah, that's it. And the
Okay.
$60 to $80 per session is in Canadian dollars, by the way, and our Canadian dollar is taking a plunge right now.
Yeah,
So
right. So it's not, yeah.
yeah, there's that to consider. Here, what seems to be the most popular are EAP, so employment assistance
Okay.
programs,
Yeah.
where let's say a federal government employee will get access to either their insurance or EAP to use, whichever they choose. If they find a great therapist who meets their needs outside of the EAP provider, then they can use their insurance. But if there's an EAP, you know, provider program, then to just make things simple, to make the match really simple and quick, they might just end up going with EAP. And that's why I say, as therapists, we need to scream from the rooftops who we are and what we're all about,
Right.
because we are competing with these big EAP
Right.
programs in
Right.
certain areas of employment. And so that's kind of what's going on. And also, because as Canadians, we have this mentality that healthcare should be free, and of course it
Mm.
should. Like I agree.
Right.
Then psychotherapy falls under that, and it should be free.
Okay. So that's even more of a heavy lift in that regard than it is
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So that mentality of martyrdom, I can never pronounce that word. Martyrdom, where we think, okay, but this service we should be giving out of free will. We should just be giving our time, giving, not expecting anything back.
Spoken like someone who's never conducted a therapy session, let me tell you.
Yeah, that's it. That's really ingrained in the mentality here.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, you know, I even remember back in my own grad years, I think I was at my last year, and I had never heard of a private practice for therapists before.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Never heard of that.
Yeah.
And there was somebody in my cohort who said, well, I think that my pre-retirement plan will be to open up my private practice. And I was like, what is that? And she was like, well, you know, it's where you see clients for therapy and they pay you. And then at that point, I was like, what?
Yeah.
People paying out of their pocket for a service that should be free? Well, I don't know if I could ever do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then here I am, coach for
Oh, yeah.
therapists, helping them set a premium fee.
Exactly. And I feel like social workers in particular
Yes.
go on that journey.
Yes.
But
absolutely.
yeah. And so do people who have private insurance, if they were to work with you, are they eligible to get out of network benefits to some, if they're just, does some insurance offer that, or is that only like if you're you know, paneled with an insurance company, you the therapist?
No, so what happens is what I do and what I recommend others do is getting the client to pay out of pocket to put it on their credit card, and then we provide a receipt, and with the receipt that they're being given, they then do the claim with their own insurance.
Okay.
So that they get the reimbursement, whatever that looks like. And I always recommend folks to check and double check with their insurance, because I don't know about you guys, but here there is sometimes a difference between psychotherapists, social workers, and psychologists, and sometimes insurance will only want to cover one of the three.
Yeah, and I think the issue that we see here a lot is just that the reimbursement rates vary wildly depending on your plan. You know, what's your deductible? What percentage do they reimburse? So there's no kind of standard like, oh, if you submit this to insurance, you'll get 50%. Like, there's just not.
No.
It's very, so there's no possible way we as therapists could know every single reimbursement rate for everyone.
No, exactly. That's exactly it. And so that's why it's incredibly important to not just fade in the background and the sea of therapists out there,
Mhm.
to really stand out and make it absolutely ridiculously simple and easy for therapy seekers to find you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
What, for your practice in particular, what percentage of your clients would you say get some sort of reimbursement? Do you know?
Oh, 100% get some
Oh,
sort of
100% get
reimbursement.
some. Okay.
Yes. So it will vary. For some, it's 100%.
Mm-hmm.
For others, it can be the most popular reimbursement rate is 80%. And it happens where, there's some little bit of some funky rules with some insurance companies where they'll be like, yeah, you get 6 sessions reimbursed at 100%, but then you read between the lines and their 100% means 180 per session. Like they decide that
Yeah.
the cap for
Right.
therapy is 180.
Right.
And that really doesn't help with the imposter syndrome we feel when
Sure.
setting our fee, because we're being told insurance companies think we're worth only that much.
Right. Right. And clients are going to think then that that's what we're worth and all that stuff. It just trickles down. Yeah.
Yeah, there's this piece of education that needs to
Mm-hmm.
happen around that. And also, what I like to say is, like, in your copy for Psychology Today, your website, even your social media content, if you're able to talk from a place of, I'm going to use the word authority
Mm-hmm.
in your niche and in what you know about the niche, not necessarily the clinical stuff and how EMDR is amazing and here are the benefits,
Right.
but like the population you work with, then there's trust that's being built. Then people are much more likely to think, all right, well, I understand why the fee is what it is. It's because this person is actually an expert in what they do.
Mm-hmm. Right. 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 Right.
Yeah.
And that paying that fee means I'm actually going to get help as opposed to, yeah. Your thing about the EMDR just being EMDRs, I always kind of chuckle a little bit to myself when I see a therapist post on Instagram and it's like 10 slides explaining how EMDR works.
I know.
And if they get likes and comments, it's from other EMDR therapists
Yes.
saying, "You explain that so well." I'm like, what client? I mean, maybe there's a few very curious, but like when I get a consult call from someone who wants EMDR, half the time they'll call it EDMR. They think it's like
Yes.
electronic dance music.
Yes.
Like, so I heard that EDMR like really helps. Like that's what they're gonna say. That's all they know.
Yes.
And that's fine. That's not their responsibility to know that, right? But like if you have 10 slides being like, and then the adaptive information processing model says blah 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 blah. Like I don't even want to read that.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly. And we touched a bit on that on the podcast episode we recorded when you guested on my podcast, where like therapy seekers in 2025 and going, into the future are becoming more and more sophisticated,
Yes.
especially if they are seeking a premium fee therapist or a premium fee experience like an intensive. They
Mm-hmm.
already read what's on the EMDRIA website.
Yeah.
They already Googled, they already chat GBT'd.
Right.
They,
Exactly.
they know. They
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
So they want your perspective
Right.
on their challenges.
Right.
They're paying for your perspective and
Right.
your way to conceptualize their story from point A to point B, whatever their point B is,
Right.
not your clinical knowledge on a particular therapy modality. And when I see exactly that on social media as what you described, somebody with a carousel, with 10 slides on how EMDR is great and the AIP model or whatever, my heart breaks, because to me that screams, I feel incompetent in my work, so I have to prove to everybody that I'm smart.
Right.
And my
Yeah.
heart breaks.
Right. Because that's not going to pull anybody in.
Totally.
Yeah. Um, I did want to talk a little because we were talking before we recorded and you were sort of talking about how well, I also want to talk about your podcast, but how you kind of moved through that process of initially in your business coaching, you wanted to focus on EMDR therapists and premium fees,
Mm-hmm.
but you sort of shifted that. Can you talk a little bit about that? I'd be really curious to hear about that.
Absolutely. So I'm always open to learning. And I think what other way to learn than to be paid to learn? Because what happened was with the content that I was posting, with the storytelling I was doing, what happened was my first coaching client ended up being a therapist who's trained in a completely different modality than EMDR.
Mm-hmm.
But what really resonated was the need to raise the fee, to have a positioning strategy and a marketing strategy that really positions this person as the go-to therapist for a particular population going through a particular challenge. And I was like, oh my goodness, this person, is not looking for my help for clinical stuff. So, sometimes we think we know our ideal clients,
Mm-hmm.
but then once we actually do the work, we learn. And that's why I say, what better way to learn than to be paid to learn? Because this is exactly what ended up happening. And so it's okay to stop, pause, and think,
Mm-hmm.
what am I doing here? Is this really what's serving the population I want to serve? And what do they need to hear? Because often we base our marketing as therapists as to what we know. And something that I like saying is, your ideal client is probably a former version of you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yes, but you do need to be speaking their language, because you might be thinking they need something when really they only need one component of that thing, and they actually need you to like expose that to the max.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, and what I was offering was the both business coaching side and clinical side of things, because that's what I would have needed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But then I realized, okay, my message is really coming across for those who are ready to invest in their business, or who are ready to stop with the martyrdom mentality, who are ready to see fewer clients, do better clinical work, and just avoid burnout
Mm-hmm.
by raising their fee. And so I decided, all right, I'm going to go all in with that. And that's where we are today. So learning about your ideal clients as you work with them. So not to
100%.
strive for perfection.
Absolutely. And you don't know that necessarily. You think you might know who your ideal client is when you start, and that does change. Yes, I completely agree. And what would you say is the primary way that business coaching clients are finding you?
So it's on the podcast and my Instagram account. My Instagram account and podcast have the same name. And today, as we're recording, I am in the process of changing the name. So
Oh, okay. Okay.
the name is, for both the Instagram and podcast, Liberated Therapist Club.
Cool.
And before, it used to be called Liberated Trauma Therapist Club. So I'm just, letting go of the trauma part.
Yep. Yep.
Liberated Therapist Club, where we celebrate liberation of therapists.
Yeah. And I love the idea of like a club.
Yes.
And so is there a literal way in which that, or is that more kind of just a philosophy, if you know what I'm asking?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's really because we're all in this together, right? Especially in private practice, we can feel absolutely isolated.
Mm-hmm.
And usually when we start out in private practice, and even for those who are seasoned private practice therapists, the people who surround us will most often have this martyrdom mentality of, you need to charge low fees, be as accessible as possible,
Mm-hmm.
burnout for the sake of humankind.
Right.
And so these are the people who will surround you, and you can feel really alone when you're saying, hey, but wait a second, I need something else here. This isn't serving me or my clients at all.
Right.
And so the idea of a club is to really promote this idea that we're all in this together, even when it feels like we're in a silo and we're the only ones with our thoughts, and we think that we're a bad therapist or a bad person because we think that there needs to be something else here. Well, you're not. You are actually part of the club. And with what I'm offering right now is 1-day intensives, where therapists in private practice come to me and we work on the positioning and marketing strategies, and we end the day with everything set up. And what I offer to these therapists is a group coaching call together, so that we end up coming together at the end with everybody that I saw individually. The group is already kind of curated, and so coming together to form this club, literally.
Cool.
So figuratively and literally.
And so it's sort of like over a certain amount of time, the therapists that you've worked with, you bring them all together? Or is it something that kind of cumulatively, like over time, anytime people can just join?
That's it. At any time, people can apply for a 1-day intensive, and then I invite everybody that I've worked with on a call, so that isolation gets broken down, so that they get this validation that, all right, it's okay to seek people who are like-minded, and it's actually super beneficial.
And are the group calls an ongoing thing? Is it a one-time thing? How does that work?
Right now, it's ongoing as I'm assessing the needs as clients come in for 1-day intensives. We are going to have our first call in April with the clients I've had in March and beginning of April. So I'm really excited about that.
That is exciting. Yeah. Awesome. Wow. I want to hear how that goes. That's really cool. How's the podcast going? Tell us a little bit about that. So how long have you been, because I know you started one, you had a podcast that was very EMDR intensives focused, and now and it was really for educating clients about intensives, right?
That's it.
Yeah. So Liberated Therapist Club, the podcast, tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, of course. So it really started with this idea of, okay, well, I need, an outlet to express all of my thoughts here, and for folks to feel like they're really not alone, like we are part of this club together. And what best way to do that than to be talking in a microphone and doing that exact thing. And so at the very beginning, it was very much EMDR therapist focused. And I was really trying to do both the clinical side of things and the business coaching side of things. And then, as I've been working with coaching clients, I've realized, all right, my people are those who know that they need to invest in their business in order for major changes to happen for them. And so that's how I've kind of pivoted into this podcast. And the goal is to really make the listeners feel like, oh my goodness, Danik's been in my brain. She is reflecting what I'm thinking, very silently in my own brain, as you are doing for your listeners as well. And to just provide this sense of you're not alone, and here we're on a journey together. Take my hand and we're going through that.
Yeah. I love that. And one other question, and we should probably wrap up soon because you and I are both busy business owners, moms, all the things. So you're in Canada, and I'm wondering if, I would imagine, of course, business coaching, the lessons are international as far as I'm concerned. Do you ever, and maybe this has never happened, but do you find it harder? Do you find like you have an audience that's mostly Canadian, mostly American, mostly something else, or a mix of all three? Do people ever wonder, like, does your message apply to me? Or is that ever something that comes up? Are we there? Okay.
Really great question. So you're right. Coaching is, does not know borders. And the message that I'm putting out there is really for therapists in any part of the world who are wanting this business model for themselves, who are wanting to prevent burnout, or raise their fee, position themselves as the go-to therapist in their community, in the population that they serve. So that knows no borders. And to answer your question a little bit more directly, it's funny because like my first client is somebody who isn't that far removed from me, so a Canadian. But then what I'm seeing is those who are really interested in the free marketing audits that I'm giving away are more so Americans.
Okay.
So it's really interesting to see how the marketing side of things, I think that when it comes to Americans, like you don't have a choice. It's a business.
Yep.
Healthcare is privatized. Like it's already there. Whereas for Canadians, we're still wrapping our head around the fact that we are heading that way. And the fact that this is the game that we are playing. We're either playing the game or we get played.
Yeah. Oh, yes, absolutely. Right. Right.
And
the more of us
it
who say
feels
no to that,
yucky,
the better.
but it's the reality.
Yeah,
We're not
exactly.
escaping it.
Yep. No. Yeah. 100%. Well, now that you mentioned it, tell us a little bit about the free marketing audits. I've seen you talking about that on Instagram, and I bet people would be interested.
Yes. So free marketing audits is where I spend 1 hour with therapists in private practice. We look at the Psychology Today profile, website copy, social media, if you use it, networking strategy. We look at what's already going really well for you. And I look at ways that you can tweak your marketing and positioning strategy, practical tips that you can use ASAP in the moment so that you elevate your positioning and marketing strategy a little bit so that you are already able to put in actionable steps to attract and convert therapy seekers into premium fee therapy clients. And so that's something that I offer right from the start. You decide to work with me afterwards. All right. You decide not to work with me afterwards. All right. Doesn't matter. You do get that out of our time together. And then we decide, is the 1 day intensive right for you based on the tips and tricks that I gave you? Because what tends to happen is during that 1 hour intensive, therapists are really excited about the tips and tricks that are being offered to elevate their positioning and marketing strategy. But then there's a little bit of the fear of missing out, kind of the FOMO, like, oh, wait, but I have to do that all by myself. And sometimes that can be really, really tricky, and to put time aside to actually do all these things. So that's why I offer a 1 day intensive where we spend the day together and we get to take care of all of this. And then the following Monday after our intensive, there's a 1 week Slack access to me, because sometimes there's these, what I call the last minute freakouts around like, oh my goodness, I just raised my fee to 165 to 225. What do I do here? And I say that 165 to 225 because that's exactly what I did for what a client and I worked on together last week. So these last minute freakouts, these last minute reconsiderations, we get to talk about it, and I get to provide feedback on your stuff.
Cool. Are the I can imagine a lot of people will be interested in the free marketing audit. Is that like are there a limited number of slots, or is it something that?
Yes, there is. And because at the moment that we are recording in March, I am preparing to go on vacation very soon in 2 weeks. Yes. So there's a limited number of slots. And when I come back, there's going to be a little bit more. So to secure your spot, it's best to send me a DM on Instagram, and I will send the link to apply, or you can click the link possibly in the show notes for the application for the 1 day intensive, and you automatically get sent my availabilities for a free marketing audit.
Awesome. So yes, that leads very naturally to the next question. What's the best way for people to follow you, to see what you're up to, all the things you're doing?
Yes. So on Instagram, Liberated Therapist Club, podcast, Liberated Therapist Club, and the application form for the 1 day intensive. Apply even if you're not sure. You will get the free marketing audit anyway.
Got it. Oh, that's a great idea. That's a great offer. That's great.
Thank you.
Well, is there anything else you feel like we missed that you wanted to talk about that we didn't touch on?
No, you know what? I think we touched on a lot of stuff. I think that what you're doing for those who want to venture out in the intensives world is absolutely needed out there. I am not hearing of any other therapist, business coach who's doing what you do. So I know that those who end up working with you are in for a real treat. I mean,
Thank you.
you are my consultant as well, so maybe I'm a little biased, but it is what it is. It's my
Yes,
thoughts.
well, thank
Yes, and
you. I
thank you so
appreciate
much.
that. And thank you so very much for sharing your time with us. And I'm excited to have people learn more about what you're doing, and keep me posted too.
Thank you so much. Talk soon.
Okay, take care.